Hey everyone, this isn't actually the intro I planned for this video. I know this will probably kill my retention rate, but to hell with it. I came across some information recently about a fairly large horror narrator on YouTube. It's someone I've been listening to for a good few years. They've been demonetized for what's being labelled as inauthentic content, which is honestly kind of hard to wrap your head around. And if you've listened to his narrations, you'll know that that is clearly not the case. And what I love about this community is that his friends in this space have rallied around him. And it's just fucking beautiful, isn't it? I think it just made me realise something. All we can really do is look out for each other. My voice is small, my reach is small, but it's mine and I'm going to use it, especially if it's in support of someone who has brought me so much joy over these years, and for free. So if you love horror narration on YouTube, and if you're comfortable doing so, please consider reaching out to YouTube on X. I'll put some information in the description below. No pressure at all, and just do what feels right for you. Now, on to the story. So tonight's story is an exclusive. It's written by author Gamal Frank, which, funnily enough, has recently had a 30-day no-sleep ban himself. So he has started a Substack, which I will link below. So if you enjoy this story, please consider going and supporting him. I'm also joined by the incredibly talented Keeper in this one. He plays a character who completely unintentionally ends up being referred to as a keeper later on in the story. Just one of those serendipitous moments that just worked. This is vampirism with a twist. There is an allegory woven through it deliberately. So see if you can work out what this story is really about. Let's begin. To understand any of this, you have to understand what my life was like before. I'm a musician. It's all I've ever wanted to be. All I've ever really been good at. I play guitar and I sing. My stuff is personal, acoustic mostly. Songs about screwing up, about loving someone so much it feels like your ribs are going to crack open, about watching the sun come up after a night that felt like it will never end. You know, the usual angsty singer-songwriter fare. For years, that's meant a life of ramen noodles, overdue bills, and the kind of soul-crushing day jobs that make you question every choice you've ever made. I've played to empty bars where the bartender was more interested in wiping down the counter than my music. I've played open mics where I was just background noise for drunken conversations. I've bussed tables and washed dishes, all while the calluses on my fingertips softened and the dream got a little bit dimmer. I was close to giving up. Not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, sad way that people do when reality finally wins. I was thinking about selling my guitar, the one I'd had since I was 16. I was that close. Then I saw the flyer. It was tacked to a cork board in the back of a dusty, independent music shop. It was simple, printed on thick, cream-coloured cardstock in a plain black font. No graphics, no flashy logos. Musician wanted. Nightly performance, solo act preferred, inquire within. Below it was a street address. It wasn't in the main entertainment district, but a few blocks over, in a part of downtown that was trying to be trendy but hadn't quite gotten there yet. The kind of street where one artisanal coffee shop, a vintage clothing store, and a lot of empty storefronts. There was no name for the venue, no phone number, no website listed, just an address. It felt strange, unprofessional even, but I was desperate. The alternative was pawn in my Martin, and that felt like cutting off a limb. So I went. The address led me to a heavy, unmarked black door set into a brick wall, tucked down a short flight of stairs from the sidewalk. A basement. I hesitated for a moment, the rational part of my brain telling me this was how you ended up in a news story. But the thought of that pawn shop ticket pushed me forward. I knocked. The man who opened the door was exactly the kind of person you'd expect to find behind a door like that. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a tailored but slightly dated black suit. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, and his skin had a pale, waxy quality, like an old photograph. His eyes were the strangest part. They were dark and didn't seem to reflect the dim light from the street lamp above. He didn't smile.
"You're here about the position,"
he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my own voice suddenly feeling small. "Yeah, the flyer?" He just stared at me for a moment, his gaze so intense it felt like he was weighing my soul. Then he stepped back, holding the door open.
"Come in. Play something."
The inside was unexpected. I was expecting a dive bar, sticky floors, the smell of stale beer. This was different. It was clean, meticulously so. The room was small and intimate, with dark wood panelling and a handful of small round tables, each with 2 simple chairs. A small, slightly raised stage was at the far end, with a single stool and a microphone stand. The lighting was low and warm, coming from small, shaded lamps on the walls. It was classy, but also strangely silent. The air was still and heavy, and there was a complete absence of the usual background hum of a city establishment. No whirling coolers, no distant traffic, no chatter from a back room. He gestured to the stage.
"The acoustics are excellent."
I felt like I was in an audition I hadn't prepared for. I shakily unzipped my guitar case, pulled out my old Martin, and sat on the stool. My hands were cold and trembling. I didn't know what to play. A cover? An original? My mind was blank with anxiety.
"Play something that matters,"
the gaunt man said from the shadows near the bar. So I did. I played the first song I ever wrote that I was truly proud of. It's a song about my dad, about the last conversation we had before he passed away. It's raw and it's painful, full of unresolved guilt and the kind of love that aches. I usually have to be in a certain headspace to play it, but standing there with this strange man's dark eyes on me, it just came out. I closed my eyes and let the music take over. I poured all the stress of the past few months, the fear of failure, the grief that still lived in a quiet corner of my heart, into the strings and my voice. The notes filled the silent room. and when I sang the last line, my voice cracked with genuine emotion. The final chord hung in the air, vibrating, and then faded into absolute silence. I opened my eyes, my chest heaving, my vision a little blurry. The man was still standing by the bar, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable, and I started to think I'd completely blown it.
You'll do,
He said finally.
The gig is yours if you want it. 7 nights a week, 10 p.m. to midnight, 2 sets. The pay is generous.
He named a figure that made my jaw drop. It was more per week than I made in a month at my last dishwashing job. It was enough to cover rent, bills, food, and still have some left over. I'll take it, I said, probably too quickly.
Good,
He said.
Be here tomorrow at 9:30. We have a select clientele. They appreciate punctuality and passion.
And that was it. I had the gig. The first week was a dream. I showed up. The owner, who I still hadn't gotten a name from, he just seemed to materialise when needed, would nod at me and I'd get on stage. The audience was always the same. About a dozen people, scattered amongst the tables. They were a strange mix, a young couple that never spoke or touched, an old woman in a fur coat, even though it was mild out, a man in a crisp suit who looked like a banker. They'd file in silently just before 10 and sit down. They never ordered drinks. The bar was always unstaffed, a purely decorative piece of the room. And they were the most attentive audience I'd ever had. No phones, no talking, no coughing. They just watched. Their eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. It was unnerving at first, but I told myself they were just serious music lovers, true connoisseurs. And the pay was in my bank account every Monday morning like clockwork. I couldn't complain. The strangest thing, though, was the silence. After every song, no matter how much heart I poured into it, there was nothing. No applause, no whoops or cheers. Just a deep, profound silence. And a dozen pairs of eyes staring at me. Then, after a moment, I'd just start the next song. It was after a particularly emotional set during my second week that I first noticed the other thing. I'd played a string of songs about a brutal breakup I'd gone through a year prior. I really dug deep, channeling all that remembered pain and betrayal into the performance. It was cathartic, like lancing a wound. When I finished, I felt utterly and completely empty, not just tired, hollowed out. I felt like I'd run a marathon. My hands were shaking. I felt dizzy. As I packed up my guitar, my eyes scanned the audience as they were silently filing out, and I saw it. Under the dim lights, they seemed to glow. A faint internal luminescence, a soft radiance that seemed to emanate from beneath their skin. Their faces, which were usually blank and pale, now had a touch of colour. They looked serene, satisfied. satiated. The old woman's wrinkles seemed softer. The banker's tense shoulders were relaxed. It was bizarre, and I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. The next night, I was still feeling the drain from the previous performance. I didn't have it in me to dredge up all that emotion again, so I decided to phone it in. I played a set of my more technically complex but emotionally shallow songs. I focused on hitting the notes perfectly, on my finger-picking technique, on keeping my voice steady. It was a competent performance, but it was hollow. There was no soul in it, and I felt fine afterward. A little tired from concentrating, but not the bone-deep exhaustion from the night before. But the audience, they were different. As I played, I could see them shifting in their seats. The banker's jaw was clenched. The young couple seemed to be sitting even further apart. A low, almost inaudible hum of discontent seemed to fill the room. When my set was over, they got up and left quickly, their faces looking pinched and disappointed. Their skin was as pale and dull as it was when they came in. The glow was gone. A pattern began to emerge. If I played with real gut-wrenching, honest-to-God feeling, if I sang about loss or joy or heartbreak and meant every single word, I would end the night feeling like a husk. I'd go home and sleep for 10 hours and wake up feeling groggy and empty. And the audience would leave looking radiant, peaceful and full. If I played mechanically, focusing on technique and just going through the motions, I'd feel perfectly fine. But the audience would grow agitated. A few times the owner would be standing in the back, his dark eyes fixed on me, his expression a clear, cold warning. This is where my rational mind started to break down. It made no sense. It was impossible. But it was happening. Every single night, the gig was paying my bills. It was digging me out of a financial hole I'd been in for years. But the cost was starting to feel too high. I started to dread going on stage. I started to look at my guitar as an instrument of my own depletion. I tried to find out more about the venue. I searched the address online. Nothing. No business registered. No reviews, no social media presence. It was a complete digital ghost. I searched for the owner, but I didn't even have a name to go on. He was just the gaunt man. My anxiety started to spiral. I wasn't sleeping well. I felt a constant, low-level exhaustion that no amount of coffee could fix. I felt faded. The world seemed less vibrant, my own emotions more muted. Even when I wasn't performing, it was like the nightly drain was having a cumulative effect. One night, unable to sleep, I went down an internet rabbit hole. I started with generic searches like drained after performing and weird audience energy. I got a lot of new age articles about stage fright and managing your chi. It was all useless. On a whim, I tried a more specific, weirder search. Something like audience feeds on emotion. I clicked through pages and pages of results, mostly bad fiction and D&D forums. But then, buried deep on page 8 or 9 of the search results, I found a link to an old text-based forum. The design looked like it hadn't been updated since the late 90s. The forum was called something like Esoteric Realities and Unseen Phenomena. It was a hive of conspiracy theories, ghost stories, and what I assumed was paranoid delusion. But I was desperate, so I started reading. I used the forum's clunky search function, typing in keywords like emotion, parasite, drained, audience, and then I found it. A thread from 6 years ago titled A Theory on Affective Predators. The original post was a long, rambling wall of text, written by a user with a long since deactivated account. The user laid out a bizarre, terrifying theory. He wrote about a type of entity that lives among us, completely undetected. Vampires who didn't drink blood. They were something else. They fed on strong, raw, human emotion. He called them feeling vampires, or empaths in reverse. The post claimed they couldn't generate their own emotional energy, so they had to harvest it from others. And the most potent, most nourishing source was the pure, unadulterated emotion generated through art, especially music. The post described how these creatures would create environments, feeding grounds, where they could passively absorb this energy from a performer. The performer would feel inexplicably drained, while the creatures would feel nourished, revitalized. The post ended with a chilling sentence: "They want to eat your pain." I felt a cold dread wash over me. It was insane. It was the ravings of a lunatic on some forgotten corner of the internet. But it fit. It fit perfectly. The silent, attentive audience. The way they never applauded because applause would break the circuit, dissipate the energy. The way I felt hollowed out after an emotional set. The glow. The goddamn glow. I had to test it. I had to know for sure. For the next week, I became a machine. I spent my days practicing scales, arpeggios, and complex chord progressions. I went on stage each night and performed with the emotional investment of a metronome. I played the saddest songs I knew with a completely blank heart, focusing only on the precise placement of my fingers and the pitch of my voice. I felt fantastic, energized even. The pay still came through, but the venue started to change. The audience dwindled. First, the old woman stopped coming, then the banker. Soon, there were only 4 or 5 of them left, and they looked awful. Their skin was sallow, their eyes were sunken. They looked like addicts going through a painful withdrawal. The faint, pleasant warmth of the room had been replaced by a palpable chill. They stared at me with a new expression in their eyes. It was hunger, a desperate, angry hunger. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. I'd just finished my first soulless set to the 4 remaining patrons. As I was taking a sip of water, the owner emerged from the shadows. He moved so quietly, I didn't notice him until he was standing right beside the stage. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw an emotion on his face. It was a cold, simmering anger. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet.
What is this?
He hissed. It's music, I said, my own voice shaking. I'm playing the songs.
You're playing notes.
He corrected me, his dark eyes boring into mine.
A sequence of sterile sounds. There is no feeling. There is no substance.
He gestured with a skeletal hand towards the remaining patrons who were watching us with rapt, desperate attention.
They are hungry,
he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt louder than a shout.
This arrangement is contingent upon you providing what they need. Play with feeling, or you don't play at all.
His words hung in the air, an undeniable confirmation of my worst fears. Then I thought to myself, he was a keeper, a shepherd for his flock, and I was the trough. I went home that night in a state of pure terror. I couldn't quit. The money was too good. My savings were finally starting to build up. I was out of debt for the first time in my adult life. But I couldn't keep doing this. I felt like I was being eaten alive, piece by piece, night by night. I was trapped. My mind raced back to the forum. There had to be something else there, some clue, some way out. I spent all of Friday on my laptop, digging through the archives of that bizarre forum. I searched for hours, reading through countless stories of shadow people and alien abductions, feeling my hope dwindle. And then I found it. It was a reply to a different thread, a post from about 2 years ago by a user named Exit Stage Left. I know what you're talking about. I was in it. Not a bookstore. For me, it was a jazz club. The same kind of deal. A quiet, discerning audience. Great pay. And that feeling of being drained dry every night. They feed on you. I thought there was no way out. If you quit, they don't just let you go. The keeper makes sure you regret it. But I found a way. You have to negotiate an exit. They're creatures of transaction. You have to offer them a deal they can't refuse. One last big meal, a feast, enough to satisfy them for a long time, in exchange for your freedom and a severance. A final payment. You have to make a deal with the keeper. A deal with the keeper. The idea was terrifying, but it was also the first glimmer of hope I'd had. A plan started to form in my mind, a desperate, high-stakes gamble. The next night, Saturday, I arrived early. The owner was there, polishing a glass behind the empty bar, a task I'd never seen him perform before. He looked up as I approached, his eyes cold and expectant. I need to talk to you, I said, my heart hammering against my chest. He just raised an eyebrow. I can't do this anymore, I said, the words tumbling out. Not like this. Night after night, it's taking too much from me.
That is the arrangement,
he said flatly. I want to propose a new arrangement, I said, my voice gaining a slither of confidence. A final one. He stopped polishing the glass and gave me his full attention.
I'm listening.
One last performance, I said. Tomorrow night, but not just a regular performance. I will give you everything. I'll play one song and I will pour every last drop of genuine feeling I have into it. All the pain, all the joy, all the regret, everything I have. It will be the most potent meal they have ever had. A feast, like you said. Enough to last them a long, long time. He watched me.
And in exchange?
In exchange, you pay me a lump sum. I named a number. It was an insane, life-changing amount of money. Enough to disappear, to start over somewhere new, to never have to worry about rent again. And you let me walk away. Clean break. No consequences. The deal is done. He went silent for a full minute. I could feel him weighing the offer, considering his hungry patrons. I saw a flicker of something in his dark eyes. Greed. Not for money, but for what I was offering.
You believe you have that much to give?
He asked, a hint of a sneer in his voice. I do, I said, thinking of all the hurt and loss I had stored away. For one song, I do. He finally gave a slow, deliberate nod. His lips pulled back into a thin, bloodless smile.
Very well. One final performance. Give them a feast to remember, and we will conclude our business.
I spent the next 24 hours in a daze. I didn't practice. I didn't even touch my guitar. I just sat in my small apartment, trying to prepare myself. I had to choose the song. I had to choose the memory. I needed the one that was the deepest, most painful, the one I kept locked away. It was the memory of my first love, of the brutal, soul-shattering way it ended. It was a wound that had never truly healed. That was the one. That was the meal. When I arrived at the venue on Sunday night, the air was thick with anticipation. The entire audience was there, all dozens of them, back in their usual seats. They looked gaunter and hungrier than ever before. Their eyes were fixed on the stage, on me. They knew. The keeper had told them what was coming. I walked to the stage, my legs feeling like lead. I sat on the stool and picked up my guitar. My hands were slick with sweat. I looked out at the faces, pale, empty, waiting. They were a gallery of empty canvases, waiting for me to paint them with my soul. I met the keeper's eyes where he stood in the back. He gave me a single sharp nod. It's time. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I closed my eyes and dredged it all up. The memory, his face, the sound of his laugh, the feeling of his hand in mine. Then, the betrayal, the lies, the final, devastating conversation, the empty apartment, the years of ache that followed. I relived it. I let the pain flood me, raw and real, as if it were happening all over again. And then I began to play. The song poured out of me. My fingers fumbled on the strings. My voice cracked and broke, and tears streamed down my face. But it was real. It was the truest thing I'd ever played. I sang of love and loss, of being shattered and trying to piece yourself back together. Every note was a shard of my own broken heart. I could feel it leaving me. It was a physical sensation, like bloodletting, a warm, vibrant energy flowing out of my chest, through my voice and my guitar, and into the silent, waiting room. I risked a glance at the audience. They were incandescent. The glow was back 100 times brighter than before, and their faces, once blank, were now filled with a look of pure ecstasy. I felt myself getting lighter, emptier. The memories were still there, but their sharp, painful edges were being sanded down, consumed. The agony was fading, being replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. I was becoming a ghost at my own exorcism. I pushed on, my desperation a new kind of fuel. Just get to the end of the song. Just finish the deal. I thought of the money, of the freedom it would buy. I played the final heartbreaking chord. It rang out in the silent room, the last gasp of my pain. I let out a sob, a final, hollow sound. It was over. I had given them everything. I waited for the silence to settle, for the feeling of release. I went to pull my hands away from the guitar. They wouldn't move. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I tried again. My fingers remained pressed against the fretboard. My other hand was frozen over the strings. I looked down at them, my hands, but they didn't feel like my own anymore. They felt like foreign objects attached to my wrists. Then, my right hand started to move. It strummed a chord. My fingers on the fretboard shifted, forming a new one. My mouth opened, and a new verse began. A song I didn't know I knew. Words of a sorrow I hadn't yet felt. I was screaming on the inside. Stop! The deal is done! Stop! But my body wasn't listening. I looked out at the audience, my eyes wide with terror. They were still glowing, their ecstatic expressions unchanged. The feast wasn't over. They wanted more. The keeper, standing in the back, was smiling that thin, predatory smile. He had never intended to honour the deal. The deal was a trick to get me to open the floodgates completely. My body continued to play. It dredged up new feelings, new pains I had forgotten were even there. The grief for my father, the loneliness of my childhood, every failure, every insecurity, every dark thought I'd ever had. It was all being pulled out, converted into music, and served up to the silent, radiant entities in the chairs. I was being scraped clean. The emptiness inside me grew and grew until it was all that was left. I felt my consciousness begin to fray, the world turning grey and distant. The last thing I saw was the keeper's smile as the music finally stopped, and my empty body slumped off the stool and onto the floor. I woke up in a hospital bed. The sheets were white and sterile. A nurse with a kind face was checking my IV drip. She told me I'd been found unconscious on the street by a sanitation worker a few blocks from my apartment. Severe exhaustion, dehydration, and malnutrition, the doctor said. They'd had me for 3 days. They asked me questions I couldn't answer. Who I was with, what I'd been doing. I just mumbled about overworking myself. They eventually let me go, handed me a pamphlet on managing stress. When I got back to my apartment, I checked my bank account online, more out of a numb sense of obligation than actual hope. My breath caught in my throat. The money was there. Every single penny I had asked for. My first thought was that it was a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and starvation. I had to be sure. I walked the 12 blocks to the address of the venue. There was no black door. There was no short flight of stairs. There was just a flat brick wall where it should have been, covered in old, faded graffiti. A seamless part of the building next to it. It had never been there. Shaking, I went back home and tried to find the forum. Esoteric realities and unseen phenomena. The link was dead. 404 not found. I searched for it, for the usernames, for the thread titles I remembered. Nothing. It was all gone. Wiped clean. I'm free. I'm rich. I never have to worry about money again. But the deal was fulfilled in a way I never imagined. They took the feast. They took it all. I went to my father's grave last week. I stood there, looking at his name carved in the stone, and I waited to feel the familiar ache of loss. Nothing. I remembered that I loved him. I remembered that I missed him, but the feelings themselves were gone. It was like reading a biography of a stranger. I put on my favourite record, the one that used to make me weep with its beauty. I felt nothing. I watched a comedy that used to make me laugh until my sides hurt. I felt nothing. I look at my guitar, my old Martin, and I feel no love, no nostalgia. It's just an object made of wood and wire. They ate my pain, my ability to feel it. They ate my joy, my grief, my anger, my love. They took the artist and left the instrument. I am a hollowed out shell, a ghost in my own life. I have all the money in the world and all the time in the world to spend it. But I have no idea what to do with it, because there is nothing I want. Nothing brings me pleasure. Nothing brings me sorrow. There is only a quiet, grey, silent emptiness. The show is over, and I am what's left when the music stops. I do love an emotional ending. I just do. Before I wrap this video up, I just want to say a genuine thank you to Keeper for joining me on this one. As always, it was a pleasure to work with you, and I will leave all of his details below, so please go and check him out. I'd also genuinely love to know what you thought of this story. Did you pick up on the allegory, or did something else stick with you? Let me know in the comments. I do read them, and I do enjoy seeing how different people interpret the same story. Thank you for listening, and take care of yourselves and take care of each other. I'll see you in the next one.